Okay guys, I want to show you today how to find a common denominator. And what that means is, quite frankly, that your denominators on both fractions are the exact same number. So they are common. We'll look at that with two fractions and with more than two fractions. We begin with two fractions. The first thing we find is a common multiple. And if you remember multiples, we skip count. So when I'm looking at these two, I could do a whole lot of skip counting, but there is a faster way to do that. I know that using that commutative property of multiplication, that 6 times 8 and 8 times 6 both give me 48. Because they both can be multiplied by a whole number to get 48, 48 is the fastest way to find a common multiple. So that becomes my common denominator. 48 on both sides. Now, that's what we're looking for here. Your common multiple, again, multiplying 6 times 8 gives us a common denominator. However, as you recall, when we multiply fractions to find equivalent fractions, we have to do the same thing to the numerator that we did to the denominator. So if you look at this, we kind of went both ways. In the first instance, I took 8 times 6. So because I went 8 times 6, I also have to multiply that same value times my numerator of 5. And that gives me 8 times 5 is 40. Now, I'm going to go ahead and erase this part of it. The same is true when we go the other way. We multiplied this 6 times this 8 and got 48. So we need to also multiply 6 times 6, or the opposite side numerator. Again, I'm going to remove this so that you can see sort of the steps, looking at it as in two steps. One, simply find that common multiple, and that is your common denominator, and then cross multiply your denominator times the opposite numerator to create the numerator, and this denominator times the opposite numerator to create this. Now, the reason we want to use this is because it's hard sometimes to compare something like 6/8 and 5/6. Both of those are greater than 1/2, so we can't use our 1/2 benchmark fraction. We can use some number sense, but when you look at this, 36/48 and 40/48 are very close. So I strongly encourage you to do this. Now your parents can show you the shortcut if they understand how to do the shortcut, which eliminates spending the time on the denominator, but until you're 100% comfortable with this, I think you need to do every step. This is in your math journal. Now, what about when we have several fractions and we're going to be asked to order them least to greatest or greatest to least? That's a little more challenging. It takes a few more steps. The first thing you want to do is look at all of your denominators. We have 4, 10, 20, and a 5, or 4, 20, 10, and 5. Now, I always look at my largest number, that's 20. And then I look at all my other numbers and see, can I find a multiple that gets me to 20? Now to sort of show you every step, most of you can pretty quickly say, yes, I can multiply 4 times 5, 10 times 2, or 5 times 4. But I want you to see the whole process. So I would write my multiples. I would skip count until I got my greatest denominator. Now with 5s, I'm skip counting by 5. And again, I'm finding a common multiple. And by 10s, obviously, that's quite a bit quicker. I only had to double it one time. So 20 is now my common multiple, and that's what I want to use as my denominator. You know what? I'm going to go back 2 steps here, guys. I'm sorry, but I left one final comment out on this one that I meant to do. So Remember, last thing is, when you have denominators that are the same, you simply look at the numerator. The larger numerator is a greater value, so 5/6 is greater than 6/8. Sorry about that. Okay, back to our 4. To reiterate, we found all 4 denominators. We looked at the largest one. We found multiples until we found a common multiple that we'll use as our common denominator. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaps. That means 4 times 5 to get 20. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 5 times 4 gives me 20, and 1, 2, 10 times 2 gives me 20. So then I go over here and I set up to find equivalent fractions. Now I left my 14/20ths off because it's already in 20ths. So remember, what I do to the numerator, I do to the denominator. 4 times 5 equals 20. So I multiply the numerator by the same value, and 3/4 is equivalent to 15/20ths. 10 times 2 equals 20, so I multiply my numerator by 2. 16/20ths and 8/10ths are equivalent fractions. And finally, 5 times 4 equals 20, so again, multiply your numerator by the same value. 2 times 4 is 8. And now these are a lot easier to compare. Again, the denominator is the same, so I know that the smaller the numerator, the fewer parts I have, and that this is the most that I have out of these 3, the least, and that one would be in the middle. However, we do not want to forget that we also had a 14/20ths. Okay? So, when you are done, again, with common denominators, we find them so that comparing fractions is so much easier. It's almost foolproof. All you have to do is make sure you look at one thing. What order it asks you to put them in. I said least to greatest. It could say greatest to least on questions. So always be very careful there, because it would be sad to do all this and then put them backwards. Okay? Least to greatest. So I'm looking for the smallest numerator, 8. 8/20ths. Done that one. Then I look for the next smallest, 14. So 14/20ths. 15/20ths. And lastly, 16/20ths. Okay? Now, everything I just showed you here is also in your math journal. If it's easier for you to look at the paper and follow steps than it is to go back and forth on a video, feel free to do that. But I want you to try it. Sit down. You and your parents both do this. Get to give your parents homework. You're welcome. All right. So, these 2, I simply want you to use the first steps that I showed you, where you found that common multiple by multiplying these, and that's your common denominator. Compare these 2, greater than, less than, or equivalent to each other. On number 3, I gave you 4 fractions. Go from the least to the greatest. And on number 4, greatest to least, comparing these 4 fractions. And as I've said a few times already, remember, this is also in your journal. So find your comfort zone, practice away, and come back to show me how smart you are.